This video is intended to be diagnostic and critical, not to be berating or finger-wagging. This video contains spoilers for Heartbound as well as its ARG component and is intended for a technical or non-technical audience. So recently, several YouTubers have released videos reacting to the code of Pirate Software's game Heartbound. And there's been criticism of the use of an array as the data structure used to manage game state. And specifically, it's a 437 element integer array. So I'm going to very quickly explain what that means in a non-technical way. An integer array is like a pillbox, where it has the labels on it. You see Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. But instead of boxes with the days on them, they're indexes, and they start at 0, and then you index to 1 and 2 and so on. And in the case of Heartbound, it goes to about 436. And then each box contains a single pill that's worth a particular integer. So if you want to be sure you understand what an integer array is, go ahead and pause the video and take this quiz. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay, here are the answers. Now, what you need to understand about arrays in the context of game state management is that they're unconventional for this purpose because they are a flat data structure. And to understand what I mean by conventional in this case, let's look at some typical scenarios you'd find yourself in an RPG game. For example, if you want to equip armor, the way Heartbound processes this is that at index 1, you have either a value of 0 for pajamas or 1 for sweater. Similarly, if you're going around collecting quest items, this is also tracked. So you can see here we're in kind of the mid-late 200s. You have 0, 1, or 2 to represent the state of these two inventory items. So this is what's meant by flat. You can imagine a giant pillbox, and it's all in one line. And then inside of each of the little containers is a pill that's either a 0 or 1 or a 15, and so on and so forth. And all of this represents side quests, it's your inventory, it's NPCs, it's everything in a flat line. This is opposed to the more conventional concept, which is a hierarchical structure. In a case like this, you would have something like the player owns weapons, and then the weapons own stats. Same thing for like a side quest. The side quest owns its own progress, where progress is like the active state of the side quest. And then the NPCs just listen to that progress. So without doing like a practical code example of a hierarchical structure, let's just take it at face value that flat is unconventional in this case. And it's not uncharitable to do that because Pirate Software has said there's a specific reason and an unconventional reason for why the game is structured like this. And if you look at one of the recent videos, it's in the description, he left a comment explaining that the array for the save file is to create a workable structure for reverse engineers trying to solve the ARG behind the game. So normally when you play Heartbound, you're running it on a Steam client and you're using some kind of input like a mouse or a keyboard. But the ARG around the game involves using the game and its file system to basically go to websites that have secret information that have to be decoded with other tools. But let's formalize this a little bit so we can understand it all at the same level in terms of how it fits into the game structure. So here's a wiki entry for one of the steps of the ARG, and there's a website link right here, and that if we click on, it looks like we get nothing. It's a gopiratesoftware.com link, but if we hit inspect, in the body there's this cryptic message. So what's going on here is part of the ARG is that you're given information from Heartbound that forms URL parameters, which you can then use on an HTTP client to send a GET request to the HTTP server at gopiratesoftware.com. And then that's how you end up with these cryptic pieces of data that you can see here on the wiki. There's like steps to decode it. And then it eventually leads to some kind of meaningful message that's like a clue to progress through the ARG. So if we were to map this out, we have Heartbound running on Steam, which is the quote-unquote normal way to play the game. But then through the game, and in some cases its own file structure, you have to use an HTTP client to get secret information from gopiratesoftware.com, which you then have to decipher with tools like StegHide or Google Maps, Morse code, audio files, stuff like that. And I'll go in and say, this is really cool. Like, if you go through the wiki, some of the steps involved are very intricate, and this is very involved and very impressive. It's not some kind of like minor mini game or little feature. It truly does serve as like a wrapper around the game itself. So this is sick. So what he's referring to in that comment from earlier is a specific part of this ARG where you have to take the save file of the game and then through an external third-party sponsored program called the Heartbound-Save-Editor, or HBSE. I say sponsored because, and I'll show you in a moment, he's actually given them data directly, so that's why I call it sponsored. You have to use that to further manipulate Heartbound in order to progress the ARG. So with all this background information, we arrive at the question I'm trying to answer, finally. The question that is being asked here is making game state an array a valid component for a meta puzzle? And then kind of the offshoot or sub-question there is the data structure of game logic artistically meaningful? So do you see why this is actually a very serious and interesting question about game design, and it's not just maybe where you thought the video was going? So if we check the HBSE GitHub, which is linked in the description, we can see that they receive data directly from Pirate Software. That's what I mean by like a sponsored tool, like he's working directly with them. But the save file structure in the game, remember, is this large integer array. But this essential data that the tool relies on is an Excel file. They have taken data that, through some unknown process from Pirate Software, at one point it's an integer array for the game, but by the time you get to the tool is centered around an Excel file. And this discrepancy, I'm not putting this out to be like, see, he's a liar. That's not the point of this. What I'm saying though is that the game native data structure is not analogous to an Excel file. And an Excel file is more like a struct array, not an integer array. A struct, you can just think of it as an object that contains variables, where the variables are like names of a column. So what this means is that they're given the Excel file, they have to convert it to a different type of file called a TSV. For the sake of brevity, it doesn't really matter, we'll just pretend it's still an Excel file. And then they run it through a Python script that cleans it up. And you might read this and say, oh, there it is right there. They said changes on the text of the save structure in order to make it more user-friendly. They're changing it. It's not user-friendly. It's not that deep. If you've ever done any development work with a TSV, CSV, Excel file, whatever, eventually you're going to run it through some kind of Python script to clean it. And that's all this does. I won't even bother to show it on screen. Just understand that they take it, they make very minor updates to it, they clean it up. And the changes made by the script are very minor. This is the most aggressive change out of like every single line in the file. Most of it is just like making things capital letters or adding or removing spaces. So it is not unusual to sanitize a TSV, CSV, Excel type file with Python. There's nothing unique or incorrect about what Pirate Software is handing them. This is like a normal development process. But if we look at what they're doing inside of HBSE, we can see there's a fairly long, it's like, 600 line file. This file is dedicated to translating the Excel sheet from a sheet back into a correctly formatted integer array. Okay, so with that in mind, let's take a step back and look back at our map of the ARG, and let's go ahead and remove this step where we're sending game data to the program, sending the integer array to the program. That doesn't actually happen. What happens is Pirate Software sends them directly some kind of data. What he's sending them and how he sends them that, I don't know. I don't think it's that deep. He's just sending them data. They compile that data with other ARG information into an Excel sheet, and then they use Python. Well, once the Excel sheet is converted to TSV, they sanitize the TSV with Python, and then they feed that to a C program that converts it into an integer array, which is the format that the game's file structure expects. And then on top of that, the HBSE has a GUI that the end user can use to, facilitate all these interactions. So with that in mind, let me be very clear. I think the ARG and the HBSE are both sick. I think this is really cool, especially if you look through some of the puzzles on the ARG wiki. Some of them are very involved and very interesting and creative. Now, what I'm asking is, what role does the integer array play here as a data structure? Because the HBSE itself, it has this metadata dependency, but it's not structured like an integer array. It's this Excel sheet that's compiled from various different sources of information from Pirate Software himself and from Heartbound and from the ARG. Secondly, the GUI that the HBSE uses also does not resemble an integer array. If we look at this window, this is a screenshot from their GitHub. Notice the tabs at the top: global, hometown, the tower. This is the top level hierarchy. Then it's the pool. And then it's the coffee temperature. And then it's hot or cold. So do you see what I'm saying? That the structure of it being an integer array is not utilized in the process at all. It's only utilized out of necessity when it has to be translated to interact with the game. But the actual form of the HBSE, it doesn't matter what structure it is on the back end. The end user, this is the GUI they get. This is how they interact with it. For the HBSE to be the HBSE, it just has to translate the data in a way that it can communicate with the game, whether that's an integer array or like a YAML file or JSON. The actual shape of the data has not shown itself to be relevant here at all. The HBSE converts the information into an integer array because that is what the game accepts. So let me be very clear. That is how the relationship works. It is not true that the integer array must be an integer array for the HBSE and therefore the ARG to function. The HBSE and the ARG are dependent on an integer array because the game's files say so. So now that we understand this, the question is the integer array's overall cause and effect on the game, on the ARG, valid? The supposed pros for this we were given at the beginning of the video through the comment was that this is required as a rich component of the ARG. But based on what we just looked at, based on the source code of the HSBE, it's not directly dependent on the structure of the data. It's dependent on the data itself, and as a con, the metadata that is attached to it through this Excel sheet that they have to, as a group effort and working directly with him, they have to compile the sheet, then make it a TSV, then sanitize it in Python, then reconvert it to an integer array in C. And so that is what I mean by a metadata dependency. And if this is going over your head, let me just be very clear. I really want to hammer this home. I went back and made this. This is what a 430 something element integer array looks like. And before people freak out and say, that's JSON, that's not GML. It doesn't matter, it's an integer array. I promise, it's not a trick, it's not like a sneaky trap. This is what an integer array looks like. So if we look through this, right, over 400 lines long, clearly you can see a massive difference in what information this contains versus an Excel file with higher dimensionality that has named columns for each row. So it's not, just to be very clear, it is not like a minor difference. It's not like a, oh, well, there's metadata. They have a completely different shape and structure to them. And so the result of this, the fact you have to kind of flip-flop between what the game wants and what is manageable, you're creating issues for scalability and maintainability, which lead to overhead in Heartbound itself and in the save editor, and therefore the ARG. If you look through the source code of the HBSE, which you can on GitHub, they have a lot of exceptional cases where they have to say, okay, stop for the next 7 rows because we have to do something special with these variables. And then they go along the file somewhere and say, okay, stop here, skip this row, go to the next row, only do this function on these rows, check if this column is like this or not. You can go look at this for yourself. Just understand that when you use more involved data structures like a nested set of arrays, structs, and enums rather than this integer array, you can predict what the possible values for variables are. Whereas the metadata is just whatever is created by this group effort, it is what it is, and then they have to really be particular when they sanitize it. So that's what I mean by scalability, maintainability, and overhead. So if we go back to our question, is making game state an array a valid component for a meta puzzle? I think we've shown that the answer is no, and my camera's in the way. And then in addition to that, the second question, is that artistically meaningful? Yes. If it is your goal to make it more difficult, then yes. But if we believe that beauty lies in elegance, if we believe that coding is elegant and that software architecture in computer science can be elegant, can be beautiful, then I'm arguing that using an integer array for obfuscation and difficulty like this is unelegant. So my proposed solution to this is to refactor in order to make the ARG lean, right? Right now we have the metadata compilation process for the HBSE, and we also have these HTTP requests that have to go to gopiratesoftware.com. I would say, is it not more elegant and still valid as an ARG to put some of these components in Heartbound directly? So we use a more valid nested structure for game state. That makes Heartbound more maintainable and easy to develop. Then virtualize an abstraction layer, meaning create some kind of function in the game that lets people perform what the HBSE is intended to do now. And also, I would suggest getting rid of this external dependency, this Go Pirate Software HTTP request. Don't get me wrong, that is cool, and I think you should keep like the puzzles the same, but just, I would say make it like a computer in-game. Like in-game, there's like a terminal in Laura's room or something, and on that terminal, you go to like a fake Go Pirate Software. That way it's not this external software dependency, and as long as the solutions to the ARG still involve using these other external tools, I think it still meets the definition of a valid augmented reality game. Right now, when it's dependent on Go Pirate Software, it's dependent on a live web service. It's like a live service. So instead, right, what I propose, is it not more elegant and more performant if we have these ways to access the file structure, have these ways to find these clues in Heartbound itself? Right, you virtualize this pirate software thing, put a version of it in the game, and then they can still use external tools to solve the puzzle. I think this is more valid and more artistic and maintainable. And like, obviously, I am biased towards my own solution, and like my fake PowerPoint cartoon is drawn in a way that's like symmetric and centered. Like, the actual implementation of this depends on what Heartbound source code looks like right now and what the end goal is. I just think that this is more beautiful, this is more maintainable and more elegant, and it's still valid as an ARG. You can't, as an ARG, right, you cannot have full control over how people are gonna be able to solve it, right? If Google Maps goes down and there's no way to ever decipher coordinates ever again, then like, yes, I understand the ARG's dead. But again, specifically the HPSC and the Go Pirate software part, let's virtualize that. Let's put that in the game and just make it lean, and that would make it more performant and maintainable. I really think that would improve the game. Okay, if you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching the whole video. I really appreciate it. And if you'd like to learn more about me and what I'm up to, I'll be blogging my own game development progress over at mdr-blog.com. I'll be providing updates weekly every Sunday night. Right now it's been only 2 weeks, so there's really not much to look at, but every Sunday night I'll be uploading a new post about my own progress. So thanks again for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Please share this video with everyone you know, and check out my blog.